Yeah, thanks for coming. And I'm David O, and I'm a data engineer at Autodesk Central Data Platform team. And we call ourselves ADP, Autodesk Data Platform. And it's pretty self-explanatory. The Autodesk Data Platform team came around because we wanted to have this enterprise central data platform. And there are multiple different teams within the umbrella of ADP. And our team is responsible for building the foundational data aggregations, the source of truth. And recently, I've been focusing more on coming up with a framework where we assess the quality of the usage data that's being instrumented. And that's what I want to share today. And before diving into today's topic, I wanted to know how many of you here have heard of Autodesk and know what we do? Wow, you guys all do. That's surprising. Because most of the time, people know us by AutoCAD, but they don't really know what Autodesk does. But I'm glad that everybody knows Autodesk here. So yeah, then I'm just gonna do a quick introduction to the company. We've been, we make Autodesk, but we also help our customers make anything. We've been around now over 35 years, and we have a wide range of products helping our customers doing manufacturing, architecture design, construction, and even to M&Es. And we help our customer imagine and build stuff. And we started off as a desktop-based offerings company, which we used to ship CDs and DVDs. But through the business model transition, now we offer our products of course, in desktop and web-based and mobile-based as well. And I like working for Autodesk because we are a tool builder. And I think over the history of civilization, we've been growing, evolving with a lot of the help from the tools. And I think today, Autodesk provides one of the powerful and sophisticated tool for people to build stuff and help imagine stuff. And sometimes we can't just do this with just pen and paper. And so what I'm really here to talk about today is to share that Autodesk journey to become a data hero. There are a lot of companies and businesses out there in a lot of industries, but because we are all data geeks here, I think from our perspective, we can look at them, classify them into 3 different categories. The traditional business models that have not yet recognized the value of the data and how data can work, do good for the company. And data hero aspirers who have actually recognized the value of data and are having the enterprise level initiative to make data work for their organization. And the data heroes. And the definition that I'm giving for the data heroes is the companies that use data for its day-to-day operations and make informed decisions rather than relying on just the instincts. And I think through the few years of dedication, along with a few other data heroes that are out there, Autodesk also makes a lot of informed decisions. And whether it be business decisions or measurement of the customer satisfaction, we do most of the things based on the data. And we had our fair share of trouble, and today I want to focus on our story of coming up with good data, good quality data. Because I'm sure we've heard a lot of stories about success stories of implementing machine learning algorithm and putting AI components in the product to help our customers. But at the end of the day, they're only just as good as the quality of the data that we have. So we recognize the importance of it, and we have put some framework to guarantee that we have good quality data. This is just some of the products that we have. And looking at this from the customer's perspective, I think I can feel pretty rest assured that I'll find some tool within the toolbox of Autodesk if I want to do anything, if I want to build anything. But looking at this from data engineers' perspective, this was a representation of a pure disaster. Because just imagine these 150 different products sending data in their own distinct ways, having no centralized data collection strategy. And you as a data engineer is given a task to standardize the data collection strategy and come up with a consistent data aggregation and KPIs that everybody agrees upon, and also have to build trust on the numbers. So there were a lot of problems back then. And we really sat down and thought through what the exact problems are and what is going to impact us in the future, how is it going to impact us in the future if we don't solve it now, and how we can solve them. So we could put these data issues in three big categories: the data quality, an absence of the single source of truth, and the governance issue. And the biggest challenge with the low data quality that we had back then was that we didn't have enterprise data collection strategy. So what we did back then with the 150 different products is that we required bare minimum standard required fields. And it was bare minimum, so there was not much of the things, analytical things that we could do with them. And we gave each product teams freedom to extend from the standard schema and build their own facets to bring in the data the way they wanted. And over 35 years, we've been growing. We've been building new products, and if there's new technology or features that are out there, we acquire them and put them into our toolbox, our product groups. So it adds even more to the complexity of the data ecosystem that we had. So, and also we had poor data model. It wasn't really ready for any kind of big data analysis because we had such a limited set of data that is common to all the products. There were not many cross-product analysis that we could do. And each product teams, because we were so siloed back then, if they didn't have bandwidth to create their own facet, they started squeezing in irrelevant value into the columns. So it all started to differ for each product teams. And there were no validation framework going on, either in the data collection strategy or ingestion during the ingestion funnel. And things were so siloed that even though multiple different teams were working on the usage data itself, there was no really meaningful data and knowledge sharing going on. And because of all the above mentioned issues, we did not have the enterprise level standard aggregation, and which means we did not have the single source of truth. And for this audience specifically, I don't think I really need to go into what it means to have and what it means to not have the single source of truth within the company, but just to name a few, it is really difficult to become a truly data-driven company because it's so easy for people to look for the data source that supports their agenda, but not necessarily the other way around. Because if we want to be truly data-driven, we wanted to start with the data and build insight on top of the existing data. So it starts from observation, but it was the other way around. And it became so hard for different teams to agree on deciding what's going to be the true source of data when there were multiple different sources. And it was really hard to build business KPIs that everybody agrees, so we had very low trust in the key matrices. What this ended up doing for us is that product teams went out building their own pipeline, their own business calculations, so we didn't have the enterprise level true north that we can collectively work towards. And I'm not going to go into too much detail of the data governance issue, but this was actually a very time-consuming thing for us because when the data is siloed, the central team has to go into each of the siloed workflows and see how product teams are dealing with the PIIs and customer data and make sure they're all under compliance. But I don't want to say that it got easier, but at least it got simplified because now we know where all the data are. So we've got a lot of problems, and I didn't think that I would have any time to go into the technical details of the difficulties, but these are just the high-level difficulties that we had. So we need some guiding principles because we didn't want to do a major revamp again after this one. So our guiding principles were to standardize and provide consistency and build trust. So we're going to standardize our data collection strategy across all products, regardless of its platform, and also provide consistent data aggregations and KPIs, and build trust around those numbers. So when we decided to actually standardize our data collection strategy, there were two things to really consider. The technical and analytical requirements. The technical requirements and challenge that we had to overcome is, again, we had many different products, and they were built on all possibly conceivable programming languages. And we had desktop, web, and mobile products. So it had to be something that can accommodate for multiple different tech stack and everything. And because there are a lot of product teams within the organization, we can't go and work with each individual product team. So it had to be easy enough for them to be able to self-service and instrument it for themselves. And also it had to be flexible enough for a diverse technology stack and their own context. And from the analytical standpoint, it had to be standardized enough so that we can put some schema on top of it and do some analytics. And it had to be flexible enough for the diversity that we have. By diversity, what I mean is that our software that helps our customer build skyscrapers and the software that helps our customers build 3D models work in a very different ways. So it had to be flexible to accommodate that. And the solution that we came up with was the SDK. And it wasn't our original idea. We got this idea from the existing systems that are out there, like Google Analytics, where you can build the SDK and implement them into existing application and start collecting data. So these are a few of our flagship products. And we built our SDKs for all the program languages that we had. And now we have mobile and web SDKs as well. And with the help of the streaming engines, we bring them all into one single S3 bucket, and they're all in a standardized schema. So this solution is really working well for us, and especially since we went through the business model transition, and we have web and mobile products as well. But really, regardless of any technology stack and the context of the product and the platform, it is really working well for us. So we have standardized the data collection strategy, and this is a quick snapshot into our system diagram. And as I have discussed, the SDKs are on top of all those devices and platforms, and it's being funneled into a central pipeline, a common workflow, and it goes through a transport and archive level, and we have this compute and fast access. And we're getting a lot of help from Qubole, dealing with the clusters for the fast access and some of the ETLs. And this diagram is a bit outdated because we no longer have that compute box anymore. We used to try to do some of the ETLs on our own, but it worked well, but it was very resource intensive, and we thought it'd be better to rely on Qubole entirely because Qubole does a great job, and it's making our lives so much more easier. So I gotta go update this diagram, just having Qubole right in the middle. And yeah, and now since we standardize our data collection strategy and ingestion pattern, now it was time for us to build some consistency around it. And providing consistency, what it meant for us is to build enterprise level standard aggregation, like the actual data aggregation, and based on that aggregation, to build KPIs. So we have created the SDK, and we have instructed each product teams on how to instrument the SDK. And when we have now collected data into a single bucket. And the solution that we came up for providing a consistent data aggregation is EDP. EDP stands for Enterprise Data Profile. So to help you, what EDP is a set of tables about each specific data domain. I think it'll be slightly easier to understand what it is if you understand it as a glorified version of dimension table. So it is an aggregation from all the data that we have collected, but we have also coded this with multiple different Autodesk internal business logic. And also we have put in a lot of different calculations for product teams' measurement of product stability. So it's almost like a ready for analytics kind of data set, which enables our analysts and data scientists. And now that we finally have the single source of truth, we were able to provide consistent data elements across all products and platforms. And we were able to really put some effort into a centralized pipeline strategy. I only have a bullet in here, but I thought it'd be better if I can give you one example of it. One thing that we do as a centralized pipeline strategy is user ID stickiness. And we don't use user ID in order to track individual users, but we use it rather to count distinct number of user engagement and to make an aggregation with the user ID and just look at the aggregated view. But still, having the user ID enriched is really important. So we collect device ID at every event, but we collect user ID only when user have to access our system and has to be authenticated to get approved to use certain features. So we have much lower enrichment rate for user ID. So what we did was to create a mapping table between device ID and user ID, and we looked back previous 90 days. And if there's one-to-one match between the device ID and user ID, we regard that device as a sole owner, that user has a sole ownership of the device ID. So if that user ID comes up, and if it exists in the mapping table that I just explained, we started enriching user ID. And we could do a bunch of those stuff for the entire aggregation, and our enrichment rate got so much better. And we're providing this aggregation to our internal users in different level of granularity, event level, session level, and user level, because what you can do with each different granularities are different. And yeah, it's enabling our analysts and scientists by a whole lot, because they don't have to now go about creating their aggregations every time they want to do something. And also, it really freed us from supporting custom aggregations, which were never scalable. And our response turnaround time for product teams' requests were really slow, but it's not the case anymore. And since the silos have been broken down, what we really benefited from is the knowledge sharing between data community. Because they're now looking at the exact same schema for the usage data, they really shared their best case scenario with other teams. And yeah, it's really actively going on, and I love how this worked out. And on top of the single source of truth, enterprise level KPIs has been rolling out, and that's one of the really biggest wins that we had. Yeah, so it looks like we had our platform ready. Yay! So, but this wasn't the end of it. We still had one important thing left to do. So we have standardized, provided some consistency around the data. It's time for us to build some trust. So a big question here is that these look really pretty, and these are already helping a lot of our data stakeholders make decisions based on these. But how much do we trust these numbers? Do we trust these numbers enough that we feel comfortable making big business decisions and investment decisions and gauge our success and customer experiences based on these? At this point, if I were to answer that question, I say I have no idea. Data is coming into a standardized format, and it is capable of building out these metrics, but we have never looked into the value or the validity of each individual values that are populating these our schema, our standard schema. And the worst case scenario is that all the business decision makers make their decision, and product teams thought, based on the measurement that we put onto this usage EDP, that they thought customers were having good experiences. But after a few months, we go back and say, hey, sorry, some of the calculations that are going on were slightly off, or there was some issue in the source data, so we're going to go back and fix it. And what would happen is that we're never going to get that trust back unless we work hard for the next few years. So, and they would, because the people who are going to be impacted the most are the people who actually made a decision based on the numbers and the metrics, and they're going to go about doing their own ad hoc analysis, and at the worst case scenario, they'll build their own ETL pipeline, and it'll really undermine the whole purpose of building this centralized platform. So what did we do? So we went into the entire workflow and build a process for data quality check along with the data metrics that we're generating. And at every single checkpoint, at every single point where the data quality has potential to be compromised, we put some checks in there. For example, we put in place a check where we can assess how well product teams have instrumented their SDK as we have been instructed them. And we also check the validity of incoming data JSON files, and we do multiple other stuff. But in order to look at it a little bit more systematically, we put all of these into 4 different quadrants. So schema validity, tie back to our system of records, and calculation stat, and experiment data. Schema validity is an initial JSON validation, and based on the validity, based on how good the JSON format looks like, we put them into either valid or invalid bucket. And even among those invalid buckets, if it's something that our data platform team can course into a right format and make it analytically available, then we put them back into valid. And I didn't put it in here, but there is also a delayed logs. And it was quite important for us to track the amount of delayed logs because we need to know what's the proportion of the data out of the all data that we're collecting we end up having in final aggregations. So it was important to know that as well. So we do some schema validity, and also we check for referential integrity. Actually, this goes deeper than the format and schema check itself, and this validates whether the data that has been instrumented actually exists in our system of records, whether it be our system of offering, system of accounts, and system of product information. We do this for all possible data that comes in. And I'm going to give more explanation of how important this is to have the data tie back to our system of records in the later slide. And also, calculation sanity check is really important too. So we put some sanity check on the calculations that we do. And these calculations are very important because this becomes a source for all product teams to evaluate the stability of their releases. And at the end of the day, we are a software company, and even before talking about the new fancy features, if our customers having unstable experience, that's very bad. So we need to make sure it is at least stable. And we capture a lot of system-generated metrics, such as usage uptime, start count, crash, clean. There are a few other stuff as well. But the way it is consumable for data analysts and data scientists are the delta accounts rather than cumulatives. But it comes in as cumulative. But sometimes the calculation of it is not as easy as it sounds because customers sometimes they meddle with the system clock, and we haven't really identified what the exact reasons are, but sometimes these cumulative counts come in a weird way. It gets smaller over time, and sometimes the customer's system clock is at like 22. So there are a lot of weird stuff going on. So we try to put in place a sanity check for this as well. And last but not least, we put validation for experiment data as well. As I have mentioned, we have given our product teams flexibility to bring in data that is other than what we require for a standard schema. And I think I forgot to mention that. Yeah, so previously, before our new platform came in, we gave them the freedom to build their own facets. But what we do now is that we looked back at all the data collection strategy of the product teams, and we built a predefined facets for them. So they can optionally take the facets into their SDK and instrument them. And it'll start collecting the data they want, but into the required columns that we have assigned them to put this thing in. So what this really helps us doing is that new data scientists and new data analysts, when they join Autodesk, they won't really have to go into the data, try to figure out where all those experiment data is sitting. And because it is archived in a standardized format. So each element of the 4 quadrant consists of the score for each of these categories. And the scores from each of these categories are weighted based on the importance, and it makes up the overall health score of our usage data. Yes?
How do people view this internally? How is this data shared?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because that's what I'm going to...
It's like writing CS and that's like a health score, right?
Yeah. So this health score and the metrification and dashboarding of it is actually where we're getting at. That's the main point of the talk here. And that's what I've been working on for the past few months for. So thank you so much for the question. And before jumping into that, I wanted to explain how these source data quality metrification is helping us build trust around the business KPIs that we have. So this is one of the most widely used dashboard that we have at Autodesk. It's called UPM, Uniform Product Metric. It gives you a lot of simple stats and also calculated success stats for across all the different products. And let's look at the total active users. And of course, total active users is important for its own nature, but it's more important for us because Autodesk is still going through, almost at the end phase of going through the business model transition. We want bigger growth in the subscription than the purchasing of each individual standalone products. So this number is important. But if business users if business analysts are only provided with this metrics, even though there are some anomalous activity going on here, we don't have like a quick intuitive validation methodology to see if that is actual reflection of the truth or if the spike or drop is just a data source issue. But now that we have this quality measurement, if we provide these metrics side by side with the business KPIs, what will happen is that business analysts will know when there is a problem in the data. And just by being visible about the source data quality, we gain a lot of trust. Even though these data quality has dipped somewhere in the middle, and the business analysts will know when to trust, when not to trust data. And people are understanding enough that both quantitative data and qualitative data has its limitations. Nobody expects that to be perfect. Qualitative data has its own limitations because there are a lot of possibility of having biases in them, and quantitative data could have a lot of system breaks down in the middle. But what's really good about quantitative measurement is that we can measure how good or bad that the metrics is. So by having these source quality measurement, it really helps us take advantage of the measurability of the quantitative data. Yeah, so by using this, we gained internally a lot of trust in the business KPIs because let me give you one example. There were multiple different ways for us to measure distinct user ID. And some teams preferred this, some people preferred that, and they were, because they were worried about limitations of each source data. But after we provided this metrics, along with the centralized definition of the user count, then we no longer have that kind of endless disagreement anymore. So we do have the trust in metrics, but we wanted to extend the trust in our data throughout the organization. But so as you can see here, we have identified some different kinds of data stakeholders. And what we found out is that what trust means for each individual stakeholders are different. For leadership teams, what they don't want to look into a nitty-gritty details of the data health score, but they want to know if the entire web products are having good data quality score. And the product developers or data scientists or analysts, they're really more keen on the quality of small numbers. And yeah, to answer Daniel's question, these are the three dashboards that we built out, and they're built at 3 different levels of granularity. So the first dashboard gives you the highest level perspective. This is for divisional leadership and the subdivisional leadership, which is product groups leadership. And second dashboard, this is my favorite dashboard. We call this assessment report card because it does look like a report card that teachers will have about all their students. So there are products and yearly releases of product. And to the right, you'll see the overall assessment score and the components that makes up the score. And there are some charts down here. And assessment details really gives a capability to drill down into the most granular breakdown of the product. And it's helping our product development group and the data analyst and scientist. So I'm going to give you a quick persona demo of these 3 dashboards. If I were to, oh, by the way, these data are not real data. These are the data that we use in our development environment. But it looks legit when you compare the data and the dashboard itself with the production data. So it'll be enough to give you the message. So if I were the head of MCP department, I'd be pleasantly surprised there is a big jump in the data score. And I would communicate the data quality with my reporting product group VPs. I would have a hard number to communicate this with. And then I would tell them, well, you did a good job, and what do you think really pushed up our product usage data score? And this division head will be happy that their organization is making decisions based on more informed and better quality data. And these product group VPs will then be able to communicate the numbers with their product managers. I think this scoring really helps because everybody knows that the data quality is an important thing, but this always has been quite a vague notion that is really hard to be objectified. But now that we have it we have that in a score, this product leadership team really have some objective standard to measure the quality of the data and strategize toward making that better. And this is the report card, and this gives us a really good view into how products have been evolving in terms of its data quality score over the years. And this is so transparent that you can see how other products are doing as well, and how it is doing in each of these criteria. And one interesting thing here is that if you look at AutoCAD 2017 and 2018, you can observe a very similar trend in production data as well. And it's observed almost without exception that over each releases, the product score gets better. So it was 53 back then, but it's 75 now. And for a product manager, it's a really good metric because they can make sure that over the years, their products are doing a better job at providing better data. And this is more of a visual representation of what I just explained. Overall score for Civil 3D 2018 is better than 2017, but this is an overall score. So, and if you go into the breakdown score, you can really identify what brought about the improvement in the data score, which is correct schema instrumentation over time. So product team must have been doing something better in terms of instrumenting SDK the way they were instructed to do. And this is a detailed assessment dashboard. And the MVP of this dashboard is the integrity, the referential integrity. And this helps our product development team because this has capability of going into the most granular aspect of the product. So even small build, such as hot fixes, will be able to be captured by this dashboard. And this was really not intended when we first began to build out this dashboard, but this is helping our data analysts and data scientists' life so much easier because referential integrity check is one of the most important things that our analysts do when they start doing any kind of analysis. Because when usage data ties back to our system of records, that's when the value really comes out. When it ties back to our system of offering, we can start monitoring how each offering is being adopted by users, how actively they are being used, how customers are liking it. So we have the SDK team, and they build this framework that has multiple different facets and the standard schema. And over time, we want that SDK to perform better. So we look at each of the components of the SDK, whether how things are getting better over time. This example is entitlement identification. So the entitlement identification score is different by each of the SDK versions. So through this view, SDK teams will have visibility into how much they have improved over time. This is the last slide, and this is my favorite slide. When we started building out this data quality assessment framework, we were just focused on the quality of the data. But what we didn't have in mind is that data quality is something that we build collectively as a company. Even though we build some kind of really airtight, perfect workflow or as we build perfect SDK, the problem is going to come up later as time goes by. And we need continuous communication between teams in order to maintain the data quality at a good standing. But as you can see from this diagram, none of these metrics are responsibility of one team. And you can see all of these scores just very transparently. And yeah, multiple different teams have to communicate. And one good benefit that we got out of this is that different teams at different place in the pipeline were speaking different languages. Even though they were talking about the exact same data element, they called it differently. And if they didn't need to, it was really hard for them to communicate. But now they speak the same language. And also, the entire product development group and the data community started to communicate. Back before we had this thing in place, data community really needed better enrichment and better quality data, but they didn't know where to go to. And when there is no standard way of collecting the data, it was really impossible for them to go about every different team and figure out how the data is being collected. But now that's possible. So yeah, this is functioning as a collaborative platform, regardless of the hierarchy within the company and regardless of the organization that people are part of. So yeah, this has been working really well for us. And this is all I have. And with better data, we'll be continuously helping our customers make anything. And thank you.
Organizationally, as you were building that team, maybe it's changed or maybe it's still, how does that team form when you're going to have to basically go, you're building a strategy to say we're going to collect data differently and then you're going to roll it out to 150 different product organizations, right? So you have to come in with a leader who owns that, and how is that structured? What does that team report to? Is it its own entity? Is it part of product or engineering? So how do you guys build that?
I'm not sure if I'm getting your question like 100% clear. Can you rephrase the question?
So as you built this team, right, we're going to go build an SDK and get better at collecting data. Mm-hmm. How did you organizationally create that team? Is it its own?
Okay.
Because you have responsibility across 150 different product orgs. So is it part of the product organization? Is it its own? Where does it report to? That sort of thing.
Yeah. That's a really good question. And it's something that happened before I joined the team, but I worked very closely with my data architect. His name is Steve Gottlieb, and he's a really good friend of Daniel. And I worked really closely with him, so I heard a lot of the background history. So this is basically a brainchild of few of the product group leadership level people. And then because they can meet regularly and strategize around this structure, and they have recognized this difficulty of not having standard schema and not being able to do any kind of cross-product analytics. And one example is that they really wanted to know what this one user is using at the same time. But because back then we had 25 distinct ways of collecting user IDs, then it makes it really hard to identify what this one user uses among our entire product group. So they came together. They thought a consolidated system is required. And as a solution to that, as I mentioned, they came up with the SDK and the standard schema. And so they built SDK team to begin with. And also, well, of course, we needed the ingestion team. And our team came about to build from that standardized data to build a enterprise level aggregation. And I think it all organically happened. And they had the committee to strategize around the data, enterprise data.
Once you start to have stuff like standard schema and being able to do cross-product analytics, like you say, you can start to do kind of data science on the data scientists. And sorry if I missed this, but I'm curious, did you manage, or do you folks do any kind of resource allocation based on what, like for example, if you're doing a bunch of queries over a certain schema, you see a bunch of products have sort of things, and there could become, in some sense, now that things are formalized, you can have like hot queries, like similar to the Qubole Air product. Are you incorporating any of that kind of intelligence to improve your own internal data workflows?
Actually, we do have some strategy. And one of those strategy is partitioning strategy. Like it's a common strategy. But a lot of the queries that are run on the platform is very heavily focused on few of our hero products. So we put them into a different bucket, different partition, and then we have our optimization strategy as well. And those are the few things that we do to make the query run faster. But did I answer your
Yeah,
question?
no, great. So, so for example, who decides what? So, for example, there may be some, I don't know, in like a website kind of space, you talk about conversion, but there'd be some standard metrics that you want to compute. Like, do you have some governance over who designs those metrics? Do you commit them to some repository somewhere? Can people access them? Can people update them? Commit their own, that sort of thing?
So is it two questions? First, who decides what's going to be the business KPI, and
Or what? Not so much what the KPI is, but what the query is that defines that KPI.
query that defines KPIs? Actually, we get the requirements from different organizations within the company, and whether it be marketing or sales. And based on the requirements that we get, so it's going to be just a generic question. And because our central platform team understands what data that we have and what it can do, we start building query around it. And how we communicate with our stakeholders, like such as marketing and salespeople, are more of the definition of that KPI that they're asking for. And we also provide them with calculations, the SQL, especially SQL queries. And then, yeah, we decide within our organization how that query is going to be, because we know the system the best. And if it's something that really answers their question, they accept it, and we go about from there.
Any other?
What was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge,
There's always that, in any big project, there's always one or two things that just
yeah.
provide the biggest problem. What was some hurdles that you had to overcome?
Hurdles that we had. Of course, one of the biggest challenge was that it's such a huge workload that I'm not just saying this because you just asked this question, but now obviously this Cubal really helped us with running the giant workflow because it was flexible, and every siloed workflow has come into one giant common workflow that we really needed elastic compute load. So that really helped us. And what are the other challenges that we had? We had a lot. I think the biggest challenge that we had is more of an alignment on the definition and decision-making process on what's going to be the single source rather than a technical piece. Because imagine 150 different product teams, almost 150 different quality assurance people in each individual teams. Some people get better user count on this source rather than that source. So that alignment was actually the hardest piece.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you again.
Thank you
David,
so
for your
much.
time.